Hi, everyone. This is the March 20th, 2019 meeting of SIG Auth. So first on the agenda is the announcement of 115 planning doc. You should have permission to read this if you are in the SIG Auth Google group or in the Kubernetes Dev Google group. It has a list of all of the SIG Auth subprojects and potential things we could do in 115. Since this is the first time that we're announcing this, and I think it was just recently created, we'll probably dive into a bit more detail into what we actually hope to achieve in the 115 cycle, probably next meeting. So please take a look and add anything that you're considering working on. It looks like we have some things that we know we need to get done. The V1 Beta 1 deprecation, extensions V1 Beta 1 deprecation is going to be a big one for pod security policy. We need to continue the node label deprecation. We have some work on encryption at rest. It looks like already listed, and it looks like we want to continue progress on the service account token issuer with the out of process signing and better support for discovery. Does anybody have comments on that? If there are no objections, we should probably defer deeper discussion until next meeting. Or are people already, have people seen this document before this meeting? I'll take the silence as a no. Let's dive in deeper next meeting once people have a chance to fill out the doc. Okay, next item on the agenda is node self-labeling deprecation timeline. So this has been ongoing work to ratchet down node isolation. We have removed the ability for nodes to set labels outside of specific key prefixes. And we are also, we also have some legacy add-ons that are still using features in ways that will be restricted in the future, hopefully. So the timeline is filled out for the 114 and 115 release. So we can hope to complete that migration. It looks like most of the labels that are still a problem are GKE or GCE specific. So we'll take an action item to clean those up and make sure that those get out of the way of improving Kubernetes for everyone else. So in the 115 cycle, we actually don't plan on doing any extra changes. I think the full migration and removal of the node labels flag will be will occur in 116. Any questions or concerns on that plan? Jordan has been driving that. Yeah, the new recommendation is to use a central component to add node labels, which is easier to lock down from a security perspective.
Do we have like any idea how long it's going to take to migrate all those GCP and GKE things? Is it going to fit in a quarter?
We already have a spot to put that stuff. So if we are, the obvious place to put that is in the GCP controller manager. We already have a node annotator controller that adds GCP specific annotations. It would be fairly easy to extend that to support adding GCP specific labels. We are trying to not penalize other clouds for legacy GCP reft.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's actually a lot of work to migrate these specific labels.
All right, we can figure it out outside of this meeting anyway.
Yeah. And for other cloud providers, I would suggest following that same model and using a node annotating control loop in your respective controller manager. Any other questions on that one? Awesome. This meeting's going quick. All right. Bugs of note. We got our first bug filed against the incompatible changes of the token volume projection. This is kind of interesting to me. It looks like there was a Helm chart using running Nginx as a non-root user. This broke the token volume source as expected. This specific breakage was actually documented in the issue 70679, which is the issue tracking the transition of the service account admission controller. So this break happens when the bound service account token volume feature is enabled. It's currently an alpha feature. They got the reporter got a little further with by adding supplemental groups, but was still broken. It looks like because whatever client they had that they were using was not actually rereading the token from disk periodically as the 113 and later Go client has been modified to do. So I think this is an interesting data point on what we need to look for and update. It's probably worth going through and fixing Helm charts and other commonly used deployment configuration proactively before advancing this feature further, and make sure that we have pretty broad coverage of client library support for token reloading. So yeah, I think this is going to be pretty difficult to phase in.
So Mike, on that, is there a plan to one day have this be the default instead of a thing you opt into?
It is a good question. I think I personally would like it to be a default. I think it greatly improves security of customers or users' running Kubernetes. The full list of security improvements is actually documented in the issue. I'll paste that into the chat. However, it will be a breaking change. I think that there's SIG API machinery is a stakeholder because this affects clients and potentially SIG architecture is also a stakeholder. So I'm not certain on the best way to phase this in as default behavior and maybe eventually a behavior that is not able to be opted out of. So that's the issue for the transition that I just pasted in the chat. Open to suggestions or help driving this.
I may have actually hit this bug on Nginx ingress on a 113 cluster.
Yep, probably. Yeah, so it just shows that we have
opt-in, right? Right now, you either enable all alpha features or you forcefully opt in to protect the token volumes today. So that should at least tell you if you had the possibility of hitting the bug.
Yes, so it's probably broken in, and the Nginx ingress Helm chart is broken in clusters that enable all alpha features. You can also enable all alpha features and then go ahead and disable this specific feature. That's supported by feature flags. Yeah, I think it's worth noting this because we have a significant amount of due diligence if we want to phase this in.
I think this is a good sign that we actually flushed out something with that alpha. So
yep,
we knew there was stuff to flush out, and like it's good that we've at least seen one.
Yep, it is.
So yeah,
yep, it's working as intended. Awesome. From last week, we had a test flake audit E2E test. After some investigation, it is believed that log rotation policy on the master was making that E2E test flaky. We marked it as flaky a couple days ago, and it should no longer be considered 1.14 release blocking. So I think that is resolved.
I added that to the 115 planning to clean that up. I spoke briefly with Jordan about what we want to do about that, and I think most of the tests that are in the E2E should be moved to the integration test. There's a lot of overlap between those already. The E2E is just more comprehensive, and it should be the opposite. And then we should just basically add a bunch of retries and not worry so much about missing individual events in the E2E.
Awesome. Yeah.
And then once we have dynamic audit to beta, we can talk about using that to build a more robust E2E test as well.
Awesome. I love integration tests. Sounds like a good plan. Other than that, there weren't any more notable bugs. There was a feature request for allowing encrypted secrets. I think AlexTC has taken an item to propose a KEP or something for that. Alex, are you around? Maybe.
He's in the list. He maybe doesn't have a mic.
Maybe mic isn't working. I see mute and unmute.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to give it to Alex.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have a document which I circulated to a few folks and got some good feedback. So I'm still finalizing some details, but I think getting to that world where we can consume pre-encrypted secrets will require some changes to the architecture of the envelope encryption, which I proposed, which we need to do anyways, and I'm proposing them for 1.15, so we can discuss them next time, I guess.
Is that a cap that's out right now?
No, there is no cap at the moment.
Okay, but for 1.15, is the change significant enough to warrant a cap and feature tracking?
Yeah, it is. It will change. It will require significant enough change. I think it warrants the cap.
All right, sounds good. We'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you're welcome.
All right. I think that was all that stood out to me for recent issues, SIG Auth issues. Does anybody have anything else to add? Awesome.
I think you pasted in the wrong link for the encrypted secrets one.
Yeah, I did. I'll fix it. Yeah, I'll fix that. So external signing, I think we mentioned this at an earlier meeting, but never dug into it. Micah, do you want to explain this change?
Yeah, sure. So I just made a cap and a PR, just kind of with an initial idea of supporting external signing of tokens. And I kind of wondered, I guess kind of wanted to get feedback on, is a design like this where we want to, I kind of modeled it after the envelope encryption architecturally, but wondered if that was kind of if there was appetite for this design or this, I guess, this feature and putting it in alpha in 1.15.
So I think this solves a couple issues that we have. One issue is it would be nice to have support for rotating that key without taking down the API server. It would be nice to support key escrow in KMS. It would be nice to support custom claims in service account tokens. I think the cons of flexibility that we need to be careful of is right now the API for token request says that tokens returned from this API are opaque and should be treated as opaque. That is the API contract today. However, they are valid JOTs, and they can be, they're always using a asymmetric signature scheme, which lends them to be validated in a distributed way, which I think is actually a pretty valuable feature. So it might be worth figuring out if we can be a little bit more prescriptive with what the token request API returns, such as let's document that the token request API must return a JOT that is asymmetrically verifiable. Let's decide what claims are required, and let's validate that when we get back a token from the external signer. And at that point, I think we get the best of both worlds. So I am pro the proposal as written. It's early in the 115 cycle, so I think we could probably make some progress on this in 115. Does anybody else have thoughts or concerns on the design?
So I think my biggest concern on this was, do we want yet another like cube specific protobuf API that we build out, kind of sort of very highly tailored to us, or is there, I think the idea of supporting sort of like rotation and stuff of this is good. I just feel like we might be resolving someone's problem or some previously attempted to be solved problem in our own specific way.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, so when we added the KMS stuff, I effectively wrote like a KMS proxy that lets you reuse re-existing stuff to wire yourself up to Cube. And so I foresee that if we make this, I'm going to write another proxy that's going to let you reuse existing stuff with this.
Right.
So I don't think the idea is bad, especially since having something like this, it puts us in a better spot to have rotation of certain things without restarting API masters, which even when you have 3, it's still disruptive in a certain sense when they get restarted. And it just happens to be a component that's pretty important to your cluster. So it is nice not to have to restart it. And one of the bits I have been thinking about is we have been looking into like how we were looking into using some KMS stuff, and one of the things that we were trying to figure out is like a dynamic registration of a KMS plugin, if that makes sense. Like how you can register device plugins, I think for the networking, or I don't remember what I was looking at.
Right.
But does that concept kind of make sense that like even if we do have some API for doing like rotation style stuff, it might make sense to be able to say, here's a generic way for things to register themselves as a rotator. And I don't know how you would do ordering in that, since with the KMS stuff, it was basically the highest one is the one that does encryption, but then any of them available can do decryption, so you can rotate out.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it would mean to fall through in a filter chain in this situation. But on the meta point, I agree with you that we should focus on what the requirements are and then try to weigh the different options that we have and figure out what type of extension mechanism is right for this specific point.
This may be a little bit too far on the KMS rabbit hole, but I think Alex has made the point before that we kind of invented our own encryption format. Like we stick a version in there and like we do our own like envelope wrapping, all this stuff. And I think probably what's driving Mo, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like the need for multiple KMS encryptors, decryptors is multiple interfacing with multiple different secret systems. And I think Alex's proposal is basically that we do that at the data format layer, so that we pick an encryption standard and we have like, and everyone effectively uses the same thing that can recognize something that's already encrypted outside of the system in that format, and then decrypt that standard like envelope wrapping. So in my mind, I think that was probably where the KMS interface went wrong. I'm not sure if we can extrapolate that to this situation or not. I still think it's probably likely that if we add this interface, us and Amazon and the other major providers and Red Hat and whoever else will go write their own plugin for it.
Yeah, I get that. So I think that I don't know of an interface that fits this use case exactly. I guess they're not, the requirements I listed are not actually requirements yet, but they're Mike's desirable properties. If you drop support for modifying the payload to add extra claims, then maybe a generic out of process signing interface would work. So we should definitely pick the requirements, and if we can slim them down enough such that a existing API already works, I'm all for using an existing API. But yeah, definitely I would look for people who are have a stake in this from proposing which APIs we could use as an alternative to the gRPC one currently proposed. Yeah,
Okay.
and
Go ahead.
all you. I'll make a comment after.
Yeah, so I guess where specifically are there other SIGs you want me to sort of to talk with this about? Like, I don't know if API machinery or architecture are thinking about, like, generic ways of feeding the API server. I mean, flags in general, right? Like, or not just flags, but other plugin type architectures. I mean, KMS, like I said, was the one that I modeled this after, just because it was one that was there, and it seemed to sort of fit.
Yeah, I think the reason we got that interface is like that's what API machinery and architecture decided was like the way to do it. So I think in my view, like this question is sort of less of is gRPC okay? And I think Mo's question was more around, has like a security person solved this like JOT signing rotation problem somewhere else that we should be leveraging? And maybe I'm kind of putting words in Mo, but
no, I mean, so that is a very fair point. It is along my line of thinking, and I look at KMS and I wonder if I happen to have like a multi-tenant Kubernetes environment, would a different interface have served me better? Like if I could, based on some metadata about the incoming object that's going to be encrypted, like could I use a different key, right? To say that, it's not that it's not just that I'm encrypting using a KMS. I'm encrypting using a KMS with a knowledge of who owns the object that's going to get encrypted, right? And it might be as simple as, every namespace and everything within that namespace needs to be treated effectively as its own unit or something like that. Like people have asked me for that before as hey, can I, I give different tenants different namespaces. Can I encrypt them differently? I was like, oh, because I don't even, the only thing I actually get is a random key generated by the API server, and we're going to encrypt that, but we have no idea what it's going to be used for.
yeah, I think in that case, though, like the solution can be you trust like the key storage thing to handle like the authorization problem, right? Like you whatever the thing is that is giving you the key to encrypt those secrets, you're like that's where you handle your authorization of like who has access to what.
Right. That's kind of what my thinking was. Just that, I mean, this fundamentally doesn't change Kubernetes like tenancy model. Like API server needs keys for this purpose, and so this is just shifting the keys needs keys from the purpose.
Just in retrospect, like I've been working on KMS plugin. In my opinion, the plugin may have not been the right idea because we overlooked an existing industry standard format for interaction with KMS and HSMs. And even though a lot of vendors like Azure and AWS jumped on the idea of writing their own plugin, there are many other enterprise vendors for HSM, for example, that will probably tell us, we already have a PKCS 11 plugin, which is the industry standard. Why do we have to write something for Kubernetes specific?
Yeah, along the lines with PKCS 11, that is literally part of the work I was working on doing in my proxy, is to bridge PKCS 11 with KMS.
Yeah.
Because that's what people want to do.
Exactly. And that would eliminate a lot of, like having gone through the deployment of this, like it actually seems like a simple thing to inject a plugin pod into the master, but it's not simple in large production environments. So having something in the tree, like basically having a single plugin, part of the Kube API server storage component, which handles all of the vendors, in retrospect, would have been a better idea in my opinion.
So it sounds like there are a couple issues noted in retrospect. One with the KMS plugin. One is that potentially the extension point was sketched at the wrong layer. It was implemented at the storage layer when it should have been implemented potentially at a higher layer. Two, potentially it's not getting enough, I guess this might be fallout of the first one. It doesn't have enough information to about the requester or where the object lives to make decisions per tenant. Three, there's existing standards that were ignored in this case. On three, I think that there are pros and cons to dropping in an existing standard like PKCS 11. The big con for me is that it's a API. It's an ABI where you dynamically load a shared object, and it's about 10,000 C functions, and it is like massively overkill compared to the specific interface that we would actually use. So I think there is some virtue in scoping the interface that we need, publishing that either through gRPC or Kubernetes API types or whatever other way we choose to extend our components, and allowing people to build bridges where it fits their use case. So yeah, I think that's fairly nuanced. Does that accurately sum up some of the problems perceived with the KMS plugin approach?
Yeah, I think so. I do think it's a very good point, Mike, to state that even though we didn't use some industry standard, like I don't think you could have a simpler interface in this one.
Okay. Yeah, it was also for completeness. It was also commented on the proposal already that a more generic solution could also be used for other places where we would like to use out of process keys, such as client TLS authentication or some part of TLS handshake.
So I guess getting back to Mike's specific proposal, like, I guess what's the next steps for him? Do we, are there like specific objections to the API? Do we need to, does someone need to kind of go satisfy themselves that there's not a better idea out there, or how do we move forward from here?
I propose that we figure out what the requirements are. Does this need to be a generic out of process key interface for all of our key needs in Kubernetes?
I think that's the clarity that I'd probably like the most.
Yeah, because it's unclear to me at this point. And once we have requirements, it'll be a lot easier to pick a solution. I'd really like to make progress on this in 115. So please give feedback sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm conscious of like this being kind of maybe Micah's first rodeo through the SIG Auth and contribution process too. Like these discussions need to happen fairly quickly up front.
Yeah,
with the limited time available.
Yeah, and I guess with the preferred forum for sort of those discussions be on the KEP side, I just put the PR out there as kind of a here's something to discuss, right? Like,
yeah. KEP is definitely going to have to merge before the PR, and
sure.
It's a good spot to do discussion as long as people are responsive. And if you're getting ignored, things tend to go very slowly. But we are working on improving that for SIG Auth in general and making progress on this. So I think that's a call to action for everybody here who is interested in shaping this to go and write your thoughts on the KEP, and I'll also take an action item to propose some requirements, and they're already listed, so I think I'll re-review what the requirements that are already proposed in the KEP are, and then we can start working on evaluating solutions.
Great. Yeah, and I'll leave the PR kind of as is until we get more feedback on the KEP.
Awesome, sounds good. I added to the very bottom of service accounts sub-project an item for this in the 115 planning doc.
Great.
Any other comments from anyone? Does anybody have any other items that they would like to discuss in this meeting? Cool. Well, I'll call it before anybody has time to add anything else. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you all in 2 weeks. Please don't forget to add to the planning doc.
Thanks, Mike. Yes.